Hey, I'm Scott at ediblemusic.com. If you have been trying to fix up a harsh vocal, then you already know that it is tough and a little bit frustrating. You're trying to get the vocal to sit really nicely among the rest of the mix, but it seems like it just kind of juts out and doesn't feel very comfortable to listen to. You tried to EQ perhaps, but it hasn't really fixed the problem. So I want to help you out with that, and let's first start by establishing what we mean by harshness and where we can find it within the vocal. Here's the example that I want to work with you on. I'll just show you the full song so far. I'm just balancing it. This is something that you would want to do pretty early in your mix, because if you're listening to these harsh frequencies, you're going to tire your ears out. So if you notice some harshness, you want to zero in on that right away and try to fix it. But here's the song. So a lot of layered vocals, and I pulled out just this background vocal for us to focus on today. Now let's first establish what we mean when we describe harshness. I want to try something with you. I'm going to sweep up the frequency spectrum and keep an eye in the bottom left corner for where the frequencies are. And I want you to tell me when you start to hear some harshness coming in. I'll sweep back down again too. Okay, where did you start hearing some harshness there? You can probably eliminate from this problem solving practice the lower frequencies. You probably didn't hear any there. So luckily, you don't really need to worry about that. The unfortunate part, and the thing that makes mixing harsh vocals so difficult, is that it tends to happen in a pretty broad range. So you might have tried to EQ, but then you're EQing out some parts of the vocal that you actually want there. And that can make it a little bit frustrating, because all of a sudden your vocals will sound dull. It won't fix the problem. It will sort of just bring you a new problem that you'll have to solve. But let's try to avoid getting these vocals to fall into that dullness problem and just try to focus on fixing this harshness. As I mentioned, it's going to be right around here, so let's see if we can locate it. There's the vocalist's performance there, but then it almost feels as though layered on top of that is that sharp kind of harsh frequencies that we're trying to get rid of. And the reason why this happens is usually when a vocalist is performing really loud and pushing really hard, and also pushing at the top of their register. This is the climax of the song. So the vocalist here is performing, they're giving their all. And as they're doing that, usually a vocalist will kind of raise their head a bit, and they're pushing more air through their vocal cords. So you'll get the voice, but then there's some air that's kind of squeaking through at the same time. So you get that sort of whistling frequency, or almost like a really sharp, whispery, wheezy sort of noise that comes out, because the vocalist is pushing so much air out of their mouth. And then at the same time, our mouths are sort of resonant as well. If you were to hum for a little bit with your mouth closed, if you go you can feel it in your lips and in your ears. And so that kind of noise that's coming through our vocal cords is also resonating in our mouths. And because we're singing loud, we're pushing as hard as we can. We usually have our heads tilted up and our mouths are open wider, so we're pushing all of that towards the microphone. And the microphone, additionally, is really sensitive to that exact frequency area. So it's sort of a compounding thing that happens. And the way to try to fix it initially is to try to maybe adjust your mic position, your position in relation to the mic, maybe to adjust the way that your jaw is set as you're singing. Little things like that can make a big difference. But the performer here, they gave it their all. It sounds really good. You don't want to have to throw away the whole thing, so you want to try to fix it up a bit. And if we zero in on some, and that's how you can first identify vocal harshness, is if you kind of notice your face scrunches up a little bit while you're listening. While we began with an EQ here to get a sense of where the harsh frequencies are, you might try a de-esser, which focuses on a very specific range of frequencies. It functions much like a compressor does, but instead of compressing the full signal, you can limit the band of the compression to a really specific area. And because the harshness is occurring in a specific area, that might help us out. Definitely helps a little bit. Now, you can still try to find some of the frequencies with an EQ, but I know that a lot of the frustration that happens is because you will start to add more and more EQ filters, and they'll all be really carving out deep into that area of the vocal track, and then it'll start to just kind of ruin it. But if you can find some really specific areas, then hopefully they won't have a much of a destructive effect on the rest of the vocal. And I'm going to try that here with you. And there's a little bit down here that I'd like to help out. Okay, let's see how that sounds. It does help a little bit, but you don't want to get carried away here, right? So using EQ can be a potential danger because it will start to change the sound of the vocal, especially because this happens not very often, usually only when the vocalist is pushing really hard and performing higher in their register. Then you might not need to have those EQ filters there throughout the entire song. So another thing you can try is a dynamic EQ or a multi-band compressor. Whichever one of those you have, you should give those a try. And this is how you would set it up. Hey, hey. Okay, now what this helps us to do is it still focuses on specific frequencies, and much like a de-esser, the dynamic aspect of the EQ is that it will compress just within the Q zone of where that band is located, and it will leave the rest of the frequencies alone. Now, here's the thing, you might not be able to get rid of this completely. You might have to do a little bit of extra work to reduce it. And what you want to look for as you're reducing it is to make sure that the body of the vocal is becoming more present as you do, because that's the really meaty part of the vocal that you want to be able to be present in the mix. So even though we haven't totally gotten rid of the harshness here, let's see how it fits back into the mix together with everything else. As I turn these on and off, you'll hear that harshness kind of coming out again over top of the vocal. And what we're trying to do is to get it tucked in there. There's a little bit there still, isn't there? It's tough, isn't it? Okay, let's try to find just that last little spot. I think we're on a good track. Let's see how I did. I'm gonna add one more. All right, so I just added these extra couple of filters. One is going to pull down the very, very, very high frequencies, and then the other is going to pull up more gently across the frequency spectrum, because I noticed that I'm losing a little bit of brightness here, and you might notice that yourself as well, because you're adding all these frequencies, you're taking all of these parts of the sound out. You might want to add them back in with a really gentle shelf, and then hopefully, because you've made those attenuations with other filters previously, they'll stay and they'll keep those harsh frequencies down. But now you might want to just pull up more broadly in order to reintroduce that brightness. Now, as you can tell, it's really tough, and I know that you know that already too. It takes some fine little steps, and what I had to do here was I had to fiddle around a bit and find the correct frequency areas than I had initially thought. So you might need to do that as well. Just move things around, see if they find the harsh frequencies better. And what I also had to do was I had to open up the cue and be a little more stern with the amount of compression that I was doing. All right, so little steps. It can be really tricky, I know, to really locate and pin down where that harshness is coming from, especially because a vocalist's melody changes, their performance changes. If they're singing a verse, they're not pushing as much as they are in the climax of the song as they are here. And so you might find that the frequencies will shift around so much, and you'll try to have these really sharp EQ bands, but they won't capture everything. And that's where something like a dynamic EQ or a multiband compressor can come in really helpfully. because then it will help you to focus more on a region, and you can make it narrower if you have to. But instead of cutting things down in a static way, the way that an EQ would, a regular EQ, a dynamic EQ will respond to those frequencies as they're coming up. So they can be a little more natural and they won't have such a destructive effect. You can see here, I needed to move my filter bands around a bit because I didn't quite locate them where I thought that the harshness was initially occurring. And you might need to do that too. Just move things around, adjust the Q or the bandwidth on the filter that you're adjusting, and make sure that it's centered on that harshness, and it might be wide enough just to take care of the movement of the melody and the way that the frequencies move around the frequency spectrum as well. I understand that it's tough, but I know that you can do it. Try it out.